What's wrong with you people?
Welcome to Not Another Baptist Podcast, and if you are looking for a theological education that includes both academic challenge and hands-on ministry experience, then we suggest Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. And the best way to experience SWBTS is to attend their fall preview day on October 21st. These are your opportunity to see firsthand all that Southwestern Seminary has to offer, where you will get to tour the campus, speak with faculty members, chat with fellow students, hear from President Adam W. Greenway, and experience the campus community of Southwestern Seminary. Kyle, what's that guy that would say, "But wait, there's more"? Was that Billy Mays? Billy Mays?
Yes, that's right. Very good.
But wait, there's more. At this year's preview day, attendees will have a chance to win a $1,500 scholarship, and it is named the Hensley Heretic Memorial Scholarship. But anyway, fall preview day is October 21st, and so you can register today for free at swbts.edu/preview. And Kyle, I would ask how you're doing, but I don't honestly care because we have a special guest today. Kyle, who is with us this morning?
This morning we have Robert's Rules of Order himself. I'm just kidding. No, we do have someone who knows a lot about Robert's Rules. She has asked that we not call her an expert, but she does have a very good working knowledge of Robert's Rules of Order and parliamentary procedure. And she also helps keep our good buddy Jonathan Howe in line on a regular basis on the most important Southern Baptist podcast, one that brings a great deal of value to our convention and conversations there. And that is Mrs. Amy Whitfield.
Hey,
Amy,
guys.
welcome to the show. Yeah.
Good morning.
Yeah, how are y'all?
We are doing. See, she cares about you to ask that kind of question. And she's kind and considerate.
Amy, so since you were in North Carolina, and I will start off by giving props because NC State took it to my Red Raiders on Saturday.
It was a big weekend in the Triangle. Like our teams are doing well right now. So yeah.
So props to North Carolina State and North Carolina. They owned West Texas last week. So there you go.
Yeah.
In other sporting news, Kyle's team was finally eliminated from playoff contention, which
we were in it up until like the last month. We were right there, man. Anything could have happened up until the last month.
All right. Well, one of the reasons we brought Amy on the show, we won't call her an expert, so we'll go with semi-expert. Is that okay? Semi-expert, quasi-expert?
That works. That works.
Quasi Robert's Rules. So I want to make sure I'm probably saying it wrong in the first place. Mm-hmm. Robert's Rules.
Robert's Rules of Order. Okay. It's named after General Henry Robert.
Okay.
Who basically wrote the first one. Like he developed the whole system. So
there you go. So come to Not Another Baptist Podcast, where you can have a history lesson in Robert's Rules of Order. Today we're doing that because a couple of reasons, really. Mm-hmm. Anybody that's involved in the Southern Baptist Convention may not necessarily hear Robert's Rules of Order in a sense, but it is ultimately what is guiding our annual meetings. And so, to kick it off here, Amy, why do you think it's important in the first place for us to even have rules to follow, if you will, while we're trying to make important decisions or elections, all of that sort of thing on the SBC side of things, the annual meeting side of things?
Yeah. So one of the things that's very important about our system is that we are a convention of autonomous churches who are coming together to cooperate for mission. So we're pulling all of our resources together. And we have various entities and ministries, that we do that through. And because we are not hierarchical, we are made up of autonomous churches, we do have certain decisions that we have to make, and we have to do it together. Now, Robert's Rules is designed for it's been around and is used by far more than our convention. But one of the reasons why it's important is that parliamentary rules are designed to keep an even playing field in large groups of people or small groups of people, but really useful in large groups, so that there's fairness and that everyone has the opportunity or the chance to speak and to make decisions in an orderly fashion. Essentially, you can't bring thousands of people, and let's think in 85 we had 45,000 people at the annual meeting. It's the largest gathering, like largest deliberative body on record that came together to make decisions. If you do that over a few days and you try to set the course of something, you're going to have total chaos unless you have some kind of rules about when do we talk about certain things, how do we talk about it, who speaks when, things like that. Now, sometimes I know people can get frustrated because they say, well, I wanted to speak and didn't get a chance. But that's, again, part of the rules, because you have to have time limits on something so that you can get, to the next thing. So where parliamentary rules help is they give some kind of framework for us to do our business, around. And so we use Robert's Rules of Order. There are some other sets of rules, but this is the one. Nothing else has really taken off like this did. And so we use that. It's in our bylaws, that anything that's not provided for in our rules themselves, in our governing documents, that's the rule book that we use. So, and one of the reasons why I say I never call myself an expert is, first of all, if you have a copy of Robert's Rules unabridged, it's massive. I mean, it's incredibly difficult to be an expert in this. There are some. So I have so much to learn, but it's important. And I encourage people to have a working knowledge of it. I love to study our system and to figure out how to take this and apply it to our system so we can get done what we want, which is ultimately to pool our resources to get the gospel to the ends of the earth.
Now, we mentioned at the beginning, most of the time, Roberts kind of operates below the surface of a business meeting. It governs what's happening, but it's not often you have to come out and say, hey, according to Robert's rules, this is how we have to proceed with this. But occasionally those situations do arise. And so I know, as you've kind of served on the parliamentary side of convention meetings, in 2016, there was an unusual situation that came up in which Roberts played a big role in then what we had to do to rectify a really unusual situation. So talk us through kind of what happened in 2016.
Yeah, so that was a very interesting situation. So in 2016, we were in St. Louis. That was my first time to serve as an assistant parliamentarian. And I was such a rookie. And my experience had been that when I was in college and participated in some of the things that I did in my major, I was part of some groups that had to use it, but we didn't have a parliamentarian. So we didn't have anybody coaching us. So the only way that you could participate is to learn it yourself so that you could do it. So it was kind of everybody in the room needs to have a general understanding of what we're doing, and we need to all follow the rules. So that's where it sort of came into play. And then when I got involved in convention life, I began to take my sort of working knowledge and then try to help organizations I was with or whatever to be able to know so that we're following the rules when we're in there participating. So then when I became an assistant parliamentarian, my plan that year was I'm going to just come in and listen and watch. And it's probably going to be a low key, I'm just going to learn all the basic rules, no biggie. And I came off the stage from the resolutions report, which was an interesting one in and of itself, because we had a messenger that felt like they had not been recognized, and we had to kind of work through that. And the chief parliamentarian, Barry McCarty, had to explain why the time had run out and they had not been able to be recognized and had to cut the microphone off. It was, very dramatic. So then from that, where I'm standing on the stage watching all of that, wide-eyed, trying to have no, response, I stepped down, and the folks there kind of beckoned me over and said, "Hey, we got a little issue. What do you think about this?" And what had happened was, the presidential election had 3 candidates, and we came back from the first round, and there was no one got a majority of votes, so we had to go to a runoff. So when you go to a runoff, you take the ones the top 2, and you go to the second one. Well, this seems pretty simple. You're looking for a majority of votes. You've only got 2 people. Well, the sticky situation we were in was that it was actually a combination of our bylaws and Robert's. So our bylaws say that that it has to be a majority of the votes cast, like it's a majority of the total votes. Okay, total votes cast. Roberts says that ballots that are filled out incorrectly and can't be counted, that they count in the total. So what happened was, we had a runoff where the results were so close that there was a small number of ballots that maybe somebody pulled, like when they were supposed to pull ballot number 6, they pulled ballot number 7. You can't count that because you can't guarantee that someone didn't put 2 ballots in. That's the problem. Someone might say, well, I just did the wrong thing. You can't count it. Or if someone marked 2, different places, and you can't discern what the vote was. So when that happens, you have to throw them out. The registration secretary reads that. He says it's this many, and this many disallowed ballots. So what happened was, they hit a mark, but because of the disallowed ballots, no one actually got over 50% of the total. And we'd never seen anything like that before. So we end up going in a room, and it was fascinating. I mean, we were in there for a very long time with everyone talking through the Committee on Order of Business, the parliamentarians, the lawyers, like all these people haggling, through Robert's rules, through our bylaws, trying to figure out what the pathway is. And for a long time, they did not tell us who the winner was. So we didn't actually know who was ahead. And I found that to be very helpful, because what it meant was we were really just trying to figure out the best way forward in the fairest way possible, so it didn't cloud any of you. Because even, it's not just about who you might want as president. When you're thinking through those things, knowing who it is might make you start thinking about, okay, well, this person might be upset, and this could happen if it goes in this direction. To be able to just think about the rules without considering, possible dominoes or outcomes, was very helpful and important. And so it opened my eyes that, man, this really does come into play fast, because the point of it is to demonstrate that this was as fair as possible. So it was a big lesson. And pretty much every year after that, we always had something. There was always something that had a sort of parliamentary conundrum to think through.
And so, as I was telling you before we came on, started recording, 2016 was my very first SBC meeting. And for the first time to be there, if guys who have been to the SBC in recent years for the first time, I think will understand this. It's overwhelming. I mean, the convention, or the exhibit hall, there's so much to take in. The convention hall itself, there's a lot of moving pieces, and then you add in that the couple of bits of drama that you had. And I remember just sitting there going, like, this is. Like, I'm glad I'm not running this business meeting, because there's just a lot of moving parts and a lot of drama that unfolded in that one. And it was a really good way to get baptized into the annual meeting, I think, because of things like the presidential election that we'll probably never see again, with two candidates and not
Right.
getting a majority. But it was quite an experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And just so for those listeners who may not have been there, or read up on it, what ended up happening is it was determined by the group, we cannot move forward. We have to go to a revote. So we had to do a third vote. But at that point, it was between J.D. Greear and Steve Gaines. And before the third vote, J.D. Greear actually withdrew his name from nomination. So at that point, it was only Steve Gaines. So Steve Gaines became president. But it was quite something. And, the other factor that was in there is there were people on every side who weren't able to be there for Wednesday, which is when the third vote would happen. So there's a lot of frustration and confusion, how this all plays out. Of course, that always leads into my big push for everyone, which is always plan to be there both days, sit down, come get your seat and don't leave, because you never know what's going to happen. But every year, whether it's, and the ones that I have been a part of, whether it was because I served as an assistant parliamentarian for 4 years, then I was on staff at the executive committee for 1 year, and I worked with a couple of, as a liaison for a couple of different convention committees, and then I consulted some and just helped, kind of as part of team they bring in. So I've played a lot of different roles. In every one, there's always been something that you have to pull this book out. You have to figure out kind of the questions going forward. And so it reminds me every year of how important it really is. The rules really do play a role, because you have to do everything you can in a room full of thousands of people to at least make the pathway for everyone to have a voice. Again, sometimes lines are long at the microphones and you don't get to everyone. And that's part of how it works when you only have so much time. But you at least have to make a pathway that there is an even playing field and that everyone has the access to speak.
Yeah. And the reality also is that most of those that are listening in, certainly Southern Baptist, we get to see kind of Robert's Rules of Order on display on steroids once a year with the annual meeting, and perhaps twice a year if you go to your state convention, that kind of thing. Many of them are going to follow that as well. But all of us, and some of us, will have that gift that God has given of a monthly business meeting at their church. And so you might be taking your first pastorate, and I wanted to, and Kyle wanted me to share this story because it kind of sets this up for Amy to talk about. Is I am filling in ultimately as the interim pastor after my pastor got very ill, and I am all of maybe 21 years old, and we had the gift of a monthly business meeting. And I get up there and I start trying to run this thing. And obviously what should have happened should have been somebody else running this thing. But I get up there, first thing out of the bat, I don't know, it was like the finance committee report, whatever it was. And they made this comment about, according to Robert's rules, we don't need a second. We just need discussion and a vote. Like, they were trying to help me out. So I look over at this guy over to the side, and he was chairman of the deacons. And he nodded his head, and I was like, okay, so is there any discussion? And so we did it. Then later on, there was something else. Well, we do need, according to Robert's rules, a second for this, and then we can discuss whatever it was. And so I look over at this gentleman again, and again, he kind of dumbfounded that I kept looking at him, and he would shake his head. And so finally, after this thing, I go up to this gentleman. His name is Robert. He was the chairman of our deacons. And I thought the entire time that they were talking about he had somehow created some rules for our church to follow for this particular church and our business meetings and whatever else. And so I just go up to this guy and I'm like, Robert, have you written these down anywhere? He said, what are you talking about, Matt? I said, your rules. He said, Robert's Rules of Order, Matt, are they're like part of our bylaws. It's a book. It's how we run meetings. And I said, and so where do I get it? Do you have it somewhere? He said, well, I'm sure we can get one. And then it clicks. It's not that Robert. His name was Robert. It was this General Robert that you were talking about earlier. And so I was
That's
baptized
fabulous.
by fire.
I'm not sure I've ever heard this story before. That is fantastic.
And
I love it.
I mean, these were published, like Henry Robert published these in like 1876. So it was
he was old enough for that. I mean, it's possible.
It was definitely another Robert.
But anyway, so that was my introduction to it. I had a pastor kind of walk me through with kind of keep it simple, stupid, kind of Robert's Rules for Dummy approach. And I was able to make it through the few months that I had that role. And since, have tried to read up on it. So some of the guys that are listening into this show are taking their first pastorate, or maybe they're doing, a building project or whatever it is that they know that this is going to be an issue, or they've heard things like, we don't care what the Bible says, what do the bylaws say, or something like that.
Right.
So we run into those situations in our local churches. And so kind of distill it. So we talked about kind of the Robert's Rules on steroids with the SBC meeting, our state conventions, that kind of thing. On the very local level, where you've got people that they don't have the slightest clue, many of them, some of them do, don't have the slightest clue about Robert or his rules, or if that's the chairman of the deacons. So why is it important for them, and what are maybe some tips that you would recommend for our listeners to maybe be up to date or aware of kind of lead those?
So one thing that's important to know, and it's good that you brought up, the rules have all different things. So as I said, it's designed so that people can have an even playing field and use their voice, but it's also designed for efficiency and for helping the meeting move along so that the people can do what they're there to do. So like you said, some things, someone said this doesn't need a second. Someone said this does need a second. As I talked about before, there was a time where debate was done and the microphones were closed down, or there are certain types of motions, like motions for appeals, motions for things that are not debatable according to Robert's Rules. And there's reasons for that. So not at every point do you need a second, or do you have someone address? Sometimes you're bringing up certain things that don't get discussed. And sometimes, you're like, I can't keep track of all of it. That's where it is good to have a working knowledge, because these rules are designed to help the group of people get where they want to get, and to help the majority, put forth the decision, and everybody to make an informed response to it. In your churches, sometimes what can happen, as you said, is that you might have one or two people who know it, that they're kind of using it in a very legalistic way. It can get super confusing for everyone else. The rules are designed to help us, not to hurt us. They're not designed to divide us. They're not designed to be weaponized. They're designed to actually give us a way to move forward together. So as pastors, or sometimes chairman of deacons, like those are the ones who are actually conducting the business. You want to have a working understanding so that you can be able to make certain rulings, so that you can be able to help keep that conversation going. This is where the book itself can be very daunting, because it's really long, it's heavy. I hate taking it to the annual meetings because it drags my bag down. It's like 700 pages and stuff. But there are a lot of different ways that you can learn it. I mean, there are super basic courses out there that, in a sense, they're not designed to make you an expert on it. They're designed to help you know your way around the book, because it's okay. I mean, I have seen every person, chief parliamentarian down to all the assistant parliamentarians, people with high certifications, much higher than what, than the education that I have. They all have their book with them. They're not there to be experts, but and have it memorized. They're there to have a working knowledge, to know where to go to confirm, and to kind of have memorized the most basic things, the things about, your church's processes or whatever. So most of the time you're going to have pretty simple votes. So you only need to know a handful of things. There are abridged guides. I know people who use Robert's Rules for Dummies. There's a parliamentary guide for church leaders that B&H put out that is by Barry McCarty. There are some things that teach you just the basics for the types of things that will happen at church business meetings and help you to know your way around. So you don't have to be intimidated. But what you do want is to make sure that you didn't just come into a meeting and just say, all right, everybody, it's a big free for all to talk about this and then let's take a vote. That you were able to walk it through a pathway where it was done decently and in order and as fairly as possible. It is important to know that it's not Robert in your church that came up with the rules, but that it is something that's a little bit time tested. But I think one thing that happened is for years it became that like everyone had to learn this, and women were learning it for sort of WMU and things like that. Pastors were all learning it, and then I think people kind of bucked up against this is boring, it's no fun, and so everybody backed off. Where it will often come up is when things are contentious or things are much more difficult to decide. Now all of a sudden everybody needs to know the rules because they want to make sure that they can participate. I think it's good that leaders have a working knowledge of this all the time, to be able to point back to the decisions that have been made and to demonstrate we did this well.
And Amy, I think you made a really good point, and that is that the rules are there to create order, not to be weaponized. Because I know sometimes you'll hear about somebody who uses something like parliamentary gymnastics to try to just create chaos.
Right.
And if a pastor or a church leader who's leading a business meeting has a working knowledge of the rules, they can help stop that. Right. I mean, you can help stop chaos and bring order and unity, and a big point that you made as well is fairness to the meeting, so that it doesn't get derailed by somebody who just wants to throw a wrench into whatever the church is trying to do.
That's right. And here's another thing that is important. So as I mentioned, sort of my I have a working knowledge and of Robert's Rules, and then probably my greater, more like very quick knowledge is more in our own governing documents and bylaws. That's what becomes very important as well. Because, for example, at the convention level, if someone comes up and they make a motion to amend the nominating report, there's something to the amendment process that follows Robert's Rules. Here's what happens when you make an amendment to something. But our bylaws say that the nominating report has to be amended one person at a time. That's a very important rule. And we basically say that Robert's Rules that's our set of rules for everything that's not spelled out in the bylaws. So it becomes important to know both. And so as a leader, if you have a working knowledge of your parliamentary rules and someone has a pretty deep knowledge of your own bylaws and constitution and governing documents, you'll have everything that you need. Because that's the thing that, like, at will, you've got to be able to, and that's one that most people know about, the nominating report, but we have some other ones that it's like, wait a second, bylaw 24 says this, or bylaw 26, 26 is one that gets used a lot. You got to be able to say, hey, hold on, that's out of order, not because of something in this, 700-page book, but because of something that was decided a long time ago in our bylaws is how we're going to do something. So it becomes very important to know both.
Awesome. And along with that, you are involved in another book, not Robert's Rules. It's Amy's Rules, the SBC FAQ, Amy's Rules of SBC Polity or something. between the two, as we begin to wrap up, why don't you share maybe some like I'm sure some of it could be, hey, just get on YouTube and search for Robert's Rules of Order Explainer or something like that, where you can follow some stuff. But if you know of some resources, the abridged guide, or maybe the Robert's Rules for Dummy, that kind of deal, share a little bit about that, and then the SBC FAQ and why that's helpful. Because what we would love about this podcast, between this and Potluck, is we're not usually here to say what you need to think, all of that kind of stuff. But here's what we're about. Here's what we're doing. We want you to be informed as you go and vote. You go and do yada yada yada. And like you said, be in the room. And so tell us a little bit about some resources to brush up on Robert's Rules, and then maybe a little plug for the SBC FAQ.
Yeah. Okay. So here, what I would recommend is, I think everyone needs, and when I say everyone, I would say like at your church. I don't know that every single person needs. Everyone needs at least one copy that is the whole thing, and that's the 12th edition. It's super important that you have the most updated edition of it. And then there are some other tools. Like I said, some people like Robert's Rules for Dummies. There's a like Robert's Rules of Order newly revised in brief. And so that's one that Robert's Rules puts out, but it sort of distills it down to the most important ones. So it's the kind of the tagline or whatever is the rules you need in a meeting made simple and easy. That one is also, it's official. It's put out by Robert's Rules of Order. So that's what it's called. And I think that one's in its 3rd edition. So Robert's Rules of Order newly revised in brief. Parliamentary Guide for Church Leaders is a very helpful one. You can also, like, if you look on Amazon, they also sell some charts and things that help. Now there are charts in the back, but you can find some things that maybe give like flow charts of the most basic motions. And so it's like a really easy, quick reference. Those can be incredibly helpful as well. And then, you mentioned SBC FAQs, which I actually am in trying to get some things in order to do an update of that, because the one thing that's tough, if you do an FAQ book about the SBC and then everybody keeps coming together and changing the bylaws, it messes up and makes it not all correct. So like, for example, the new credentials committee that's been in operation for a few years, that happened after that book came out. So there are some things that need to be updated. But the goal with that book, I co-wrote that with Keith Harper, who's a professor at Southwestern Seminary. The goal with that book was to give something that was easy for people to understand the categories and sort of the concepts. A lot of folks were always trying to figure out, well, what does the SBC president do? What is this committee doing? How do these committees work together? And the answer to those questions might be like woven throughout the Constitution and bylaws. So in order to get the full answer, you got to pull from this article and this bylaw and, things like that. So, the book was designed to say, well, what if we just take the question, what is this, or what's the relationship between the SBC and state conventions and things like that, and give as succinct an answer as possible. And then we put it in an FAQ format so that it could be easy for people to just find and get the answer that they were looking for. So it wasn't designed to be this like super compelling, read it from cover to cover, but just to have a reference there and access for you if you need it.
Awesome. Before Kyle sends us out, I got one final question for you.
Okay.
How many times have I been called out of order at First Baptist Church Hogwarts, also known as Farmersville?
I don't know how many times. I feel like it's probably a lot. I think you could have appealed some of those. Would be my guess.
I think I could have. The number is 2. The number is 2.
Okay.
Not always done according to Roberts. Sometimes it was just hush, like just shut up.
Right. I bet it was done with a lot of joy.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
Colin,
It will be. I'll be interested to see if you make it to a microphone in New Orleans. What happens? So
who even said I was going? Like I gave the SBC BART and then I'm out. I've washed my hands.
There you go. Yeah.
Cal, anything else, or do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah. So I'll say if you're listening to this and you're on a committee, SBC FAQs is a fantastic resource. In 2019 Birmingham, I was serving on a committee on committees, the most Baptistic committee we have.
Yes, indeed.
And in our meeting, there was a question that came up, and it was something about a church's eligibility based on giving or something like that. And I had the book, and so I said, well, flip through there real quick, found the bylaw that we needed to address it, and we got our answer right there. So it was extremely helpful.
I didn't know that.
So it's a great reference, just because you have the bylaws, constitution, all that right there in one spot. You're not having to go dig through the SBC website at the last minute.
That's very encouraging. I will just say that pretty much everything that I've gotten the privilege to do, whether it was that book or to be on the SBC This Week podcast, the goal is always we just want to get more people engaged in the process. So
yeah. Cool. Well, and so if you're a listener to this, you do want to check out SBC This Week. Episodes drop every Friday as well, with Amy and Jonathan Howe. And you come here for nonsense, you go there for actual news, and then the important things. Okay. If you listen to Potluck and Not Another Baptist Podcast and SBC This Week, you will be a well-informed
trifecta.
Southern Baptist.
That's right.
There you go. That's right.
That's right.
Well, Amy, thank you for being on today. Thank you for listening. And until next time, may your coffee be as black as night and as bold as the gospel you declare.
What's wrong with you people?